One thing I love about our church is our commitment to supporting the kingdom, because the kingdom is bigger than Oklahoma City, right? It's bigger than our state. It's all throughout this world, and so we get to be a part of that. You get to be a part of that. So thank you, church, for having that vision in your heart. Now, this is the last Sunday of 2019, if you guys didn't hear that already. But I'm really excited because I feel like God's really put a word in my heart for today, for you, for this particular Sunday. All right, and so I'm going to start off. I just want to share a little bit an experience that I had just recently. A few weeks ago, I brought Charlie in on a Thursday night. It was just me and him. We went upstairs to the men's restroom in the Nor Kids upstairs area. So I put him down so I can go in and use the restroom. And so I put him down in the bathroom. And so I go do my business and I come back out. And my son, my 1.5-year-old, is standing there and he has in his hand a urinal cake. And I'm freaking out. I don't know what to do. And I said, Charlie, what are you doing? And I kid you not, he lifts the urinal cake towards me and he says, eh? As if he's offering it to me. So I grab it out of his hands with my bare hand, right? And I throw it back in there. And I start thinking to myself, how did he get into this? I thought he was safe. But here's the thing, if you don't know urinals in our bathrooms, I guess, let me explain to you. So we have regular urinals for adults, and then we have the kiddie potty. Now the kiddie potty is like his perfect height. He could just go in there and reach in there and grab that urinal cake. And while we may laugh at Charlie for his craziness, the reality is a lot of us do the very same thing in life. Like, we have certain things that we can see from our perspective, and that tends to be the things that we reach for in life. Right? We reach for the jobs that are just right there for us to have. The relationships that are easily reachable for us. Rather than elevating our perspective to see a greater vision, to see what God has for us, we reach for what we think we can have. When God has something far, far greater for you and for me. And so today I want to talk about vision. To have a bigger vision. So the title of my message, if you're taking notes, the title is, I Got a New Vision. Don't laugh at me, okay? I got a new vision. It's 2020. Y'all laughed at me, okay. But I'll explain that a little bit later. Let's get right into the passage, John chapter 9. John chapter 9, we're going to read down from verse 1. It says this, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Now, a couple of details that you can already notice about this man is that one, he was blind from birth, and that he is a man. Now, we don't know how old he is, but we do know in Jewish culture, once you're 13, guess what? You're the man, right? You are a man. And so he could be a teenager. He could be older than that. We don't know. But we know that from his birth, his parents knew, and what he would later come to realize is that the rest of his life would be that he would wake up in the morning wearing the same clothes. His family, if they still stuck by him, would carry him out to the streets, and they would put him in the same spot that he always sat in. And he would hold out his hand, and he would beg for money. And at the end of the day, they would come collect him. Whatever he made that day would be his sustenance, would be what he lived on. And they would take him back home, and the next day would be the same. And that would be every day for the rest of his life. And what I love about this story is it starts off by saying, as Jesus was walking along, he saw that man. Aren't you grateful that we serve a Savior that sees those people? Right, that sees us in our most critical and wounded position. I can tell you, he saw me when I was an 8-year-old, when I was living in a broken home with an alcoholic dad and abuse all around. He saw me. That's why I'm here. And many of you, you could say the same, that he saw you and it made all the difference. Verse 2. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sin or his parents' sins? Now, I need you to know something. In this culture, suffering and sin are inherently tangled. They're tied together. And so if you're suffering in this culture, it is assumed that either you sinned or someone in your lineage sinned, and therefore you're suffering the consequences of that sin. Now, we as 21st century believers will look on that, we'll scoff a little bit, because we know there's plenty of people that, from our perspective, are innocent and they still suffer. But the reality is there is some level of truth to this understanding. Because we know, and Paul later clarifies this for us in the New Testament, that the reason there is suffering in the world to begin with is because of all of our parents' sin. If we go far, far, far back to Adam and Eve, because they sinned, because of the fall, we experienced suffering. We experienced inevitably death because of sin. And so there is some truth to this assertion, but Jesus has a different perspective. He says this, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. Jesus, you know what? There's actually a third option. And that third option is just God's purpose, God's plan. This was according to God's plan. Verse 4, we must quickly carry out the task assigned to us by the one who sent us. This night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I'm here in the world, I am the light of the world. Basically, Jesus says, listen, God has a plan, and we're part of that, to execute that plan. So when you see hurting people in the world around you, it's not enough to have this theoretical response of, well, I wonder why this is happening to this people group. I wonder why they're going through this suffering. But when you see, you should have a reaction like Jesus, like God has a plan here. When I see people hurting, God has a plan, and I'm actually part of it. I have to do something about it. So the reality is you see hurting people all the time, and maybe it tugs at your heart. Maybe God is saying, hey, you have a plan, or you're part of this plan, and God has the plan through you. Verse 6, then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. Now, I like the King James Version actually says that he had spittle. And I like the word spittle just a little bit better. It sounds cooler. Because, you know, like, I want to know how much spit Jesus used. Maybe it was a lot. Maybe it was just a spittle, you know? Yeah. Jesus probably used a lot of spit, okay? But he spit on the ground. He makes mud, and he rubs it all over this guy's face. Basically, everything I tell my 1-year-old not to do, Jesus does. He's rubbing mud all over this guy's face. And you're like, why Jesus? Why would you do this? Well, in Jesus' culture, if you were touched by bodily fluids of someone else, you became unclean. And so if someone spit or blood or urine, if that touched you, you became unclean. And that makes sense to us, that if those things touched us, we would become unclean. But there was also this belief that if those very same fluids were used as an instrument by a person of authority, it could actually be a thing that not makes you unclean, that actually cleanses you and could actually bring healing in your life. And so perhaps what Jesus is trying to help us see is that, listen, if my spit can heal, perhaps later on my blood can cleanse. Verse 7, he told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? They're like, is this the same guy? Some said he was, and others said, no, it just looks like him. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I am the same one. They asked, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they call Jesus made mud, spread it over my eyes, and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Where is he now? They asked. I don't know. He replied. Look at your neighbor, give him the title to my message. Say, I got a new vision. It's 2020. I'll explain later. Point number one, if you're taking notes. Number one, true vision comes by truly seeing him. True vision comes by truly seeing him. I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but maybe you feel like, as you're closing out 2019 and you think back to 2018, it feels very similar. That you're about at the same spot you were just a year ago, and you're ending this year at the same spot, maybe a little bit worse than where you were a year ago. Or maybe as you're starting 2020, you're starting it off just about the same spot you started out 2019, maybe a little bit worse. And there's that feeling that comes when that reality hits you. Oh, man, I feel like I'm in such a loss. And maybe you're there, and you need new vision and new direction. And that only comes when your point of reference is Jesus, when you look to him. I experience this phenomenon every once in a while. I try to explain this to my wife. She doesn't believe me. But maybe, usually like after like a long flight or something, I go to the baggage check to pick up my bag. I don't know if this has happened to anyone else. When you're standing there and you're looking at the little conveyor belt that brings your bags and you're looking for your bag, there's this thing that happens where when you stare at the conveyor belt so long, instead of the conveyor belt moving, you feel like you're moving. Has anybody ever experienced that? No one. Okay, I got you. That's what she said they all would say, but perhaps maybe you were in a car and the car next to you started moving and then you feel like you're moving. As you guys experienced, there it is, yeah. That's the one. But scientists call that vection. It's that feeling that you're moving even though you're not, because the surrounding area is moving. Because those things, when it becomes your point of reference, feels like you're the one moving when those things are moving. And the only way you kind of get your balance, you get yourself back, is by looking back at the ground, at least for me, right? Look back where I'm at, by my point of reference. And then the world becomes normal again. So often we get caught up in the craziness of this world, and that becomes our point of reference. And we start to feel like everything is moving so quickly. And we start to lose our footing. And it's when we turn our attention to Jesus, when we turn and look at him and make him the point of reference for us, man, everything suddenly starts to make sense again. We start to truly see who we are and what we're made for. And the vision of our life becomes clear when we have a vision of him and his life. And that's what God calls us to. But what happens? This guy gets this clear vision of who he is now. He finally sees. But immediately, the first thing that happens is he's interrogated by the people around him. They start saying, wait, are you the same guy? Are you sure you're not a different guy? Are you sure you were born blind? Maybe you're just kind of blind. No, I was born blind. That's what he had to say. It's the truth. And they start questioning to the truth, so much so that he has starting to lose his bearings here. And he's constantly defending the truth, his point of reference, his Jesus. Anytime God puts new vision in your heart, new direction, people will attack. And it's not because people are bad or because they're evil. It's just because they're used to you being one particular thing in their life. All right, they're used to you being the same blind guy sitting in the same spot begging for money. And when that changes, their status quo changes, it makes them uncomfortable. That's all it is. But God has called you to so much more. And sometimes it's going to change and people will attack. If you don't believe me, try something. Go on a diet. Go on a diet and then tell somebody you're going on a diet. And you'll find out that person who's never eaten a vegetable in their life is going to start giving you tips. on why your diet is not good and you should go their way. You should try keto, or you should try paleo, or whatever it is, right? Or go on a budget. And tell somebody going on a budget. Last year, we took a financial peace group, and we were taking them through the course. And some of them started posting about Facebook, how they're cutting up credit card. And people came out of the woodwork, y'all. I don't know if you know this, but people on Facebook are crazy. But broke people came out of the woodwork to explain why you should keep your credit card. Like, it's my credit card. Like, what does it matter? But that's how it happens. Right? When they see clear vision in your life, they attack it because they're used to you being the same person. Here's number 2. When you see him, people will see you differently. When you see him, people will see you differently. See, the people are looking at this blind guy and they're saying, is this the same dude? Is this the same guy? He actually looked different to them. As if they were blind before and now they could see. No, the only person with eye problems was this guy. And now everyone is seeing him differently. I remember listening to a story from a guy named Francis Chan. If you don't know who Francis Chan is, he's a phenomenal preacher. And he said how one of his friends was a professor at a seminary, invited him to come and critique some of his students that were learning how to preach. And just so you know, if Francis Chan comes and gives you pointers on preaching, that's like if Peyton Manning gives you pointers on how to do a spiral. You know, like, that's pretty special. And so Francis shared how he would give pointers and things like that to these students. But there was one student that absolutely blew him away. He said this student walked in. First of all, he walked into class late. And then he got up to the podium to preach. And he started off his sermon by saying, hey, listen, guys, I'm so sorry I'm late. But as I was walking to class, I was crossing the street, this Mack truck came out of nowhere and it hit me and ran me over. So I apologize for being late. Now, at this point, the professor is like, hold on, wait a second. Before you continue, we need to clarify some facts here. Because they're looking at him, and even though he just described that he got hit by a truck, if you look at him, he's wearing a press shirt, khakis, kind of like what I look like. He says, you don't look like you got hit by a Mack truck. Like, what happened? Did Jesus heal you? Like, what? He says, actually, you know what? I have to be honest, I'm lying. Preaching tip, don't lie, okay? He says, I'm lying. But he says, you know what? We as believers do the same thing. We walk around telling people that we believe in Jesus, that we experience Jesus, that we experience the most powerful being in the universe. And he's coming and living inside of us. And on the outside, we look like nothing ever happened. That we had an encounter with the most powerful being in the universe, and on the outside, nothing looks different. You kidding me? So often as believers, we look just like everybody else. And the point is, something needs to look different. If we're saying we're different, something's got to change. And so the question for us is, what is it that we have to change? What are some relationships that you have to cut off? What are some people that you need to cut off? What are some habits that you need to cultivate and develop? You know, in 2020, we're going to start the year off by doing a fast, 21 days of fasting and prayer. And let me tell you, it's going to look a little bit different when you're in that lunchroom, whether it's at work or at school, and you're sitting there and all your friends are eating, and you're sitting there not eating. Suddenly you're going to look a little bit different. But we intentionally cut ourselves off from certain things, not so that we look different, but so that we are different. And when we are different, guess what? We look different. People start seeing us differently. They start saying, is that the same Samson? Is that the same person? Because we start changing. Here's number 3. Number 3 is this. New vision means new obstacles. New vision means new obstacles. You know what I find interesting about this story this guy has been through some obstacles already. And some of that, it was a given. Like the moment he professed Jesus, it was given that he was going to be interrogated by the religious elite, by the Pharisees and Sadducees of his day. That was kind of going to happen no matter what. But there is some stuff that happens that I don't think he was expecting. See, at the end of the story, this man is interrogated, and then they're so unsatisfied with his witness that they call his parents, and they say, tell us the truth. Was he really born blind? They say, yeah, he was definitely born blind. And they don't believe the parents, so they bring him back in for questioning a second time, and they interrogate him again. And he starts talking about Jesus. He starts proclaiming the gospel. And they're so angry with him, they excommunicate him from the synagogue. They threw him out, is what the text says. And they say, you're never welcome back. And so this guy's literally alone in the streets. And Jesus comes back and finds him. And Jesus comes up to him and says, do you believe in the Son of Man? This is the first time he's having an encounter with Jesus since his last encounter with Jesus. And this is what he says. The man answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. A couple of things you got to notice about his response. That word sir is a derivative of the word kurios, which means Lord. It is the address that you would give to your master, to your Lord. And so there is a familiarity in this voice. He recognizes this voice. He's not sure, but he says, who is he, sir? Who is he, Lord? As if he kind of knows who's the person speaking to him. But then second, he says, I want to believe in him. And this is really perplexing because from the outside, this guy looks like somebody that clearly believes in Jesus. He clearly had a life-changing experience, an encounter with Jesus. He was blind, now he can see. And then he publicly confesses his faith in Jesus in front of all his family and friends. And then he's interrogated and gives a witness. He witnesses to other people about Jesus. Those are all the things that we would say that looks like a believer. And yet he says, I want to believe. I want to believe in him. As if to say, listen, I believed at first. And I saw the vision he had me on, and I was walking along. And I've been hit so many times. And I faced so many obstacles. The new obstacle I'm facing is just doubt. Sometimes as pastors, people ask me, or people ask pastors in general, like, do you ever doubt? And the reality is, of course. Of course we doubt. Of course we struggle with unbelief. Everyone does. Sometimes that unbelief just feels like exhaustion, like you're worn out. And that was this man. He was doing all the right things. He was doing everything he could to serve his master, his Lord. He was being a witness. He was confessing his faith. And yet at the end of his day, his own evaluation of him is, I'm not quite that strong of a believer. Can you give me some more faith here? Can you help me believe? I got a new vision. It's 2020. 3 weeks ago, my wife goes on a trip with some of her girlfriends to go out of town. And on cue, like right on cue, my son gets sick. And so all weekend, it's just me and him, and he's sick. And it is an exhausting weekend. And coming up on Saturday night, for those of you guys who know, I usually go to sleep on Saturday pretty early because, church. And I'm up late into the night. And at 1:37 in the morning, I'm still up. And God starts moving in my heart, and he starts speaking. And he starts putting vision in my heart for the future. And I gotta tell you where I was at that point. I was exhausted. I was tired. I was feeling weak. And just to be entirely honest with you, 2019 has not been my favorite year. In fact, I remember in the middle of the year talking to my wife and just saying, babe, I don't know what it is. I feel like there's a target on my back and just the devil is it's just an onslaught of attacks without any breaks. Man, I'm so tired. I don't know if any of y'all could relate with that. And I'm assuming there's some of y'all that probably felt the same way. And I was so exhausted. And God starts speaking to me. And I don't mean this creepy, like, voice from heaven kind of way. Like, it's not that. He starts moving in my heart, and he starts putting his impressions. And he starts giving me vision and direction for the upcoming year. I stay up till 3 a.m. just hearing from God. I pull out my phone. I'm taking notes as quick as I can. First thing I wrote is, I got a new vision. It's 2020. It's clear. And let me tell you, when you get new vision, when you get new direction from God, when he meets you right at the end of that road where you feel alone and broken and needy, and he steps in and he starts speaking, man, it is like a breath of fresh air when you're exhausted and you feel like you can't take a next breath. He breathes new life. And suddenly I start to feel that new energy, that new strength. I don't know if any of you could relate. Here's my prayer for you. That God puts new vision, new direction in your life. And what God confronted me with, I hope he confronts you with. That night, what he was confronting me with is this. All year, what I had been saying, what I had literally been praying to God is, God, I'm tired of losses. I want some wins. I'm tired of losses. I want some wins. Give me some wins, God. I want some W's here. And what God confronted me is this. He says, life is not about wins and losses. Because what looks like a win today could feel like a loss tomorrow. I'm like, yay, I got a big new house. That's a win. Well, wait till you get the big new bills. It feels like a loss. Or yeah, I got a big new job. Wait till you get confronted by the big new boss. It's going to feel like a loss. Life is not about wins and losses. Life is about moving forward. And to move forward, you need a clear vision of your destination. You need clear vision, clear perspective. To not reach for the things you think you can settle for, but to reach for what he has for you. To push forward, to move forward. And that's my prayer for you. You move forward into the direction that he has called you. I'm praying that those who have the power to receive that, receive that. Those who have the power to hear that, hear that. Can I pray for you? Father, right now, I pray for all my brothers and sisters. Last Sunday of the year, I pray, Lord Jesus, that you would give them strength to push forward. That you put clear direction, vision in their heart. To give them the strength to move forward. Not to settle for what they think they could have, but to realize that you have far more. And you're calling them to keep moving forward. Not to get weary on the road, but to find new energy, new strength, and new vision. Make it clear. In Jesus' name, amen.